friends. Welcome to Economic Update. Today's story is one of those moments that shakes the global order, and I want you to really sit with the implications. The headline reads, Israel in shock, Yemen's 1,000 Chinese missiles overwhelm Tel Aviv. At first glance, it sounds like another battlefield story, one more in a long line of violent episodes in the Middle East. But look deeper, and what you see is the unraveling of power, the exposure of economic vulnerabilities, and the shifting tectonic plates of world politics. Stay with me, because what I'm about to outline could well mark the beginning of a new global alignment. Let's begin with the sheer fact of the missiles. Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the region, devastated by years of war, somehow now unleashing 1,000 advanced Chinese made missiles at Tel Aviv. How is that possible? What does that tell us? It tells us that the global arms trade, driven not by defense but by profit, is reshaping who has power on the ground. Nations, once dismissed as powerless, are suddenly equipped with tools that alter balance sheets, not just military ones, but economic and political ones as well. For Israel, a country long accustomed to technological and military superiority, this moment is more than just shock. It is a financial and strategic earthquake. Defense budgets will soar, capital will shift, and foreign investors will be watching with nervous eyes. And here's the irony: while war manufacturers in China profit, and while U.S. weapons companies look to cash in on Israel's fears, ordinary citizens, Israeli, Yemeni, Palestinian, American, will be the ones paying the price in taxes, in lost jobs, and in lives. No, let's talk about the global economy. China's fingerprints on this event are not accidental. By supplying weapons, it is projecting influence far beyond its borders. It is saying to the world eye, the U.S. may have dominated the Middle East for decades, but we too can shape outcomes. This isn't just a military story. It is a story of economic competition. Every missile fired at Tel Aviv is also a message fired at Washington, Berlin, and London. The old monopoly on power is ending. And here's where the hook really lies. Wars like these are not simply about borders and rivalries. They are about markets, resources, and the profits of a global capitalist system that thrives on instability. Do you think it's an accident that weapons manufacturers' stock prices rise the moment a conflict breaks out? Do you think it's by chance that oil prices surge, enriching a few while burdening millions of households? No, these are not coincidences. They are features of the system. The events that unfolded with Yemen's launch of 1,000 Chinese made missiles toward Israel have reverberated far beyond the borders of the Middle East. For Tel Aviv, a city that has long symbolized Israel's strength, resilience, and technological superiority, the sudden overwhelming of its defenses carries a shockwave deeper than military statistics can capture. Israel has long relied on its vaunted Iron Dome and multi-layered defense systems to intercept and neutralize threats from the region. Those systems were not only tools of security, but symbols of invincibility, central to the country's psychological and political posture. To see them strained, even breached, by a massive and coordinated missile barrage from one of the world's poorest nations has unsettled Israel's public and political leadership alike. The shock here is not just that missiles were fired, it is that they managed to pierce the armor of a nation that believed itself untouchable. When ordinary Israelis wake up to the sight of skies lit by missile trails, when the confidence in their protective shield falters even for a moment, the ripple effects are profound. Security in Israel has never been a purely military matter. It has been a cornerstone of its politics, its economy, and its international standing. Investors have trusted Israel's stability because they believed its advanced technology could withstand the volatile environment of the Middle East. Tourists have come, entrepreneurs have invested, and global powers have aligned with the state because they saw it as both a stronghold and a success story. That image now flickers with doubt. And doubt in global politics is as destabilizing as any missile strike. The sheer scale of Yemen's strike cannot be dismissed as symbolic or sporadic. To coordinate 1,000 launches with the backing of foreign suppliers like China suggests a new level of organization, strategy, and geopolitical intent. It forces Israel and its allies to confront a question they have long brushed aside: what happens when advanced weaponry, once the exclusive tool of the great powers, becomes accessible to nations and groups previously marginalized? The idea that Yemen, a nation battered by civil war, famine, and years of foreign intervention, could suddenly redefine the security equation for Tel Aviv is a startling reversal of expectations. It serves as a reminder that in today's interconnected world, weakness in one domain can coexist with strength in another, and underestimated actors can alter the course of regional politics in dramatic fashion. Hooks emerge here not only in the military dimension, but in the psychological one. For decades, Israel has been the nation that others feared to provoke, armed with Western support and unmatched defense technologies. Yet today, the narrative is inverted. It is Israel that wakes in shock, Israel that must calculate whether its vaunted systems can sustain repeated strikes of this scale, and Israel that must explain to its citizens why billions spent on defense did not guarantee absolute safety. Every failure of interception, every missile that lands becomes not just a physical wound, but a symbolic blow to the image of invulnerability. And once that image is cracked, it is difficult to restore. At the same time, this event will not remain confined to Israeli society. The global audience is watching. Rival powers are studying Israel's vulnerabilities, taking notes on how mass salvos can overwhelm even the most advanced defensive architecture. Nations sympathetic to Yemen's cause are emboldened, while allies of Israel are unsettled by the prospect of escalating instability. The United States, long the guarantor of Israel's security, now faces difficult questions about its own credibility. If Israel's defenses can be saturated, what does that mean for America's assurances to its partners elsewhere? The political aftershocks are as significant as the military ones, reverberating from Washington to Riyadh, from Tehran to Beijing. The shock in Tel Aviv, then, is not a fleeting moment of fear. It is a structural disruption. It challenges Israel's self-image, unsettles its economic foundations, shakes the confidence of its allies, and emboldens its adversaries. The world is reminded yet again that power in the 21st century is not guaranteed by wealth or technology alone. It is vulnerable to surprise, to adaptation, and to the relentless drive of those who refuse to accept permanent subordination. The 1,000 missiles from Yemen were more than a strike. They were a signal, one that Israel and the world cannot ignore. China's role in this unfolding crisis is perhaps the most consequential element, because it signals not merely the spread of weapons, but the deliberate projection of power into one of the most volatile regions of the world. For decades, the Middle East has been framed as an arena dominated by American influence, with Washington shaping the military, economic, and diplomatic outcomes through arms sales, alliances, and intervention. The fact that Yemen is firing Chinese-made missiles toward Tel Aviv is not an isolated arms transaction. It is a geopolitical message written in fire across the skies of Israel. It tells the world that Beijing is no longer content to stay within its economic borders. It is willing to extend its reach into areas long considered exclusive to Western control. The hook here is obvious. A new superpower has entered the game, and it is changing the rules. China has long understood that military presence is only one way to assert dominance. Economic leverage, strategic investment, and the control of supply chains are often far more effective. But in supplying advanced weaponry, or at the very least allowing its technology to flow into Yemen's hands, China crosses a threshold from quiet competitor to open participant. It places itself as a counterweight to the United States and demonstrates to the region that power is no longer a single channel affair. For Israel, which has always relied on American protection and Western backing, this is unsettling. For Washington, it is a direct challenge. If China can empower even the weakest players in the Middle East, then American influence can be diluted, bypassed, or outright replaced. The perception of U.S. dominance, already eroding after years of missteps in Iraq and Afghanistan, now faces a tangible test. The symbolism of Chinese missiles flying over Tel Aviv extends far beyond the battlefield. It represents a broader shift in global order where economic ties with China, whether through infrastructure projects, trade agreements, or arms deals, become pathways to leverage against the West. Nations that once feared punishment for stepping out of line may now feel emboldened knowing they have a powerful backer. The global South, long marginalized, is watching closely. If Yemen, one of the most impoverished countries on earth, can gain the means to shake Israel's confidence, what possibilities does that open for others? The hook here is that Beijing is not just arming Yemen, it is arming the imagination of every state and movement that resents Western dominance. From an economic perspective, China's involvement is deeply strategic. Every missile that Yemen fires is also a signal to arms buyers across the globe. Alternatives to American weaponry exist, and they can be cheaper, effective, and politically advantageous. The global arms market, worth hundreds of billions annually, is one of the hidden engines of geopolitical power. If China can carve out a significant share, it will not only enrich its defense sector, but also weave tighter webs of dependency. Nations that rely on Chinese weapons may also find themselves turning to Chinese financing, Chinese infrastructure, and eventually Chinese diplomatic cover. In this way, military aid becomes the first thread in a much larger fabric of influence. For Israel, the presence of Chinese weapons in the hands of its adversaries is more than a tactical problem, it is a strategic nightmare. It complicates the delicate balance of deterrence that Israel has long maintained, where overwhelming superiority discouraged open challenges. Now, that deterrence is fraying. If China continues to feed the arsenals of Israel's opponents, every future conflict will be more costly, more uncertain, and more destabilizing. At the same time, Israel must confront the reality that America may not be able to stop this shift. Washington's own economic interdependence with Beijing makes it difficult to draw hard red lines. Can the U.S. pressure China when its supply chains, markets, and debts are so intertwined? This is the uncomfortable paradox that America now faces. To confront China abroad risks destabilizing itself at home. The most striking aspect of this development is how quickly it alters perceptions. Only a decade ago, few would have imagined China playing such a bold role in Middle Eastern conflict dynamics. Today, with 1,000 missiles pointing back at Tel Aviv, the unimaginable has become the undeniable. This is the hook that keeps policymakers awake at night. If China can so visibly undermine Western influence here, what prevents it from doing the same in Africa, Latin America, or even Europe? The rise of China has long been measured in trade figures and GDP charts. Now it is measured in missile strikes and the fear they generate. The world has shifted, and the shockwaves from Tel Aviv are only the beginning. The economic fallout from Yemen's missile strike on Tel Aviv may ultimately prove more disruptive than the military event itself, because in our world today, markets move faster than armies, and capital can abandon a region long before the smoke clears. Already, investors are recalculating risks, and governments are bracing for rising defense expenditures, fluctuating oil prices, and the ripple effects that come with instability in the Middle East. Israel's economy, which has thrived on the perception of stability despite its geography, is facing a sudden credibility crisis. If its defense systems can be overwhelmed by a flood of low-cost missiles, then its appeal as a safe haven for foreign capital weakens. Tel Aviv Stock Exchange may not collapse overnight, but confidence, once shaken, can drain value faster than any missile strike could physically destroy. The hook here is sharp wars no longer just target cities. They target markets, and the markets are already reacting. Defense budgets are always the first casualty of such events. Israel, which already devotes significant resources to maintaining one of the most advanced militaries in the region, will now be under enormous pressure to spend even more. Each missile intercepted costs tens of thousands of dollars, while each missile launched by Yemen may cost only a fraction of that. This asymmetry is economically unsustainable in the long run. 1,000 rockets, even if most are intercepted, could cost Israel hundreds of millions of dollars in defense expenditures. Multiply that across repeated barrages, and the fiscal strain becomes obvious. Ordinary citizens who already face high costs of living will inevitably be asked to shoulder more through taxes, reduced public spending, or inflationary pressures. The war economy always takes from the bottom to give to the top, and this case will be no different. The global economy is not immune either. Oil prices are especially sensitive to any tremors in the Middle East, and they have a way of translating battlefield news into supermarket pain. Each report of instability near shipping lanes, oil fields, or allied states nudges prices upward, rewarding energy giants and punishing consumers. Every tank filled in Los Angeles, Berlin, or Karachi suddenly costs more, and the profits flow upward to corporations already flush with record earnings. Here lies another hook. War may devastate cities, but it fills the pockets of energy and defense conglomerates whose balance sheets thrive on crisis. For them, volatility is not a danger, it is a business model. Markets beyond oil are equally vulnerable. Investors tend to retreat to safe havens in times of conflict, shifting money out of equities in volatile regions and into gold, U.S. Treasury bonds, or other perceived safe assets. That movement destabilizes emerging economies, which often depend on steady investment flows to sustain growth. A missile barrage in Tel Aviv can paradoxically slow down infrastructure projects in Africa or weaken currencies in South America. Such is the interconnectedness of today's global financial system. One act of war can trigger adjustments across continents within hours. The missile becomes not only a weapon against Israel, but a tremor in the architecture of global finance. Corporations, of course, anticipate these shifts. Defense contractors in the United States and Europe are already seeing their stock prices tick upward as governments rush to place new orders. Israel will buy more interceptors. The Gulf states will seek reassurances in the form of arms purchases, and Western legislatures will funnel billions into weapons programs. The very firms that profit most are those that sell both the promise of security and the machinery of destruction. The hook for the public is cruel. When missiles fall, your taxes rise, your fuel costs climb, your food becomes more expensive, while shareholders of weapons companies celebrate. For China, the economic message is just as important as the political one. By positioning itself as a supplier of weapons, it not only projects influence but also builds a lucrative export market. If Chinese missiles can deliver such disruptive power at relatively low cost, demand for them will surge. In the shadows of war, trade routes expand and profit margins widen. Beijing does not need to fire a shot itself. It can reap both financial gains and geopolitical leverage from the conflicts of others. This is the hidden economy of war, where every explosion on the ground echoes as a transaction in the marketplace. The lesson for the global system is clear: the battlefield and the market are no longer separate arenas. They are intertwined, with each missile strike doubling as a market signal. For ordinary people, this means that even if they live far from Tel Aviv or Sanaa, they will feel the conflict in their wallets, their job security, and their daily expenses. The missiles may never touch their homes, but the economic aftershocks already have. That is the true power of this crisis and the hook that should disturb us all in a capitalist system. War is never confined to the combatants. It is monetized, financialized, and imposed upon the many to enrich the few. The deeper truth behind Yemen's missile strike on Tel Aviv is that it exposes the structural logic of a global system that thrives on instability. This is not simply a clash of nations or a sudden burst of violence in an already volatile region. It is the unfolding of a pattern we have seen time and again under capitalism. Wars, crises, and conflicts are not random accidents, nor are they failures of diplomacy alone. They are built into an economic order that prizes profit above peace, where weapons are more valuable than welfare, and where human lives become expendable so long as the markets are satisfied. The hook here is unavoidable. Every explosion on the battlefield echoes in the boardrooms of corporations that see in bloodshed an opportunity for growth. Think for a moment about the very mechanics of this conflict. How did Yemen, long painted as one of the poorest and most devastated nations on earth, manage to assemble and launch 1,000 missiles? The answer is that the global arms trade, driven by profit, makes sure such weapons circulate. It does not matter if the buyer is a superpower, a regional ally, or a country on its knees from famine and civil war. What matters is that there is money to be made. Suppliers find ways, intermediaries profit from transfers, and governments look the other way when it suits their interests. The system ensures that instability becomes a market, a place where violence is commodified and sold. The missiles over Tel Aviv are not anomalies. They are products manufactured, marketed, and distributed by a global industry that relies on perpetual conflict. At the same time, wars serve a crucial economic function in times of crisis. They stimulate demand, generate contracts, and justify enormous state expenditures that might otherwise be politically untenable. When economies slow, when inequality grows intolerable, governments often find in militarization a convenient outlet. New defense projects create jobs in select regions, new budgets secure political coalitions, and new threats silence critics of austerity. The hook is stark. Wars are not only fought for territory, they are fought for balance sheets. Yemen's missiles may look like a geopolitical gambit, but for countless corporations and their political backers, they are also revenue streams. For Israel, this structural reality is brutally clear. The government must now convince its people that ever greater investments in defense are unavoidable, even if that means diverting funds from education, healthcare, or housing. The Iron Dome and other missile defense systems will need more interceptors, more upgrades, and more layers. Each of those comes with billion-dollar price tags, which taxpayers will ultimately cover. The irony is painful. The very population under threat must also finance the machinery of defense, enriching the firms that profit most from their fear. Meanwhile, Yemenists themselves, already suffering from poverty and blockade, pay the price in humanitarian collapse as their conflict is prolonged by the same system that arms them. Both sides of the war are casualties of the same economic engine. Internationally, the systemic logic is even more evident. Oil prices rise with each new escalation, guaranteeing windfall profits for energy giants. Financial markets adjust, creating openings for speculation. Nations on the periphery, worried about their own vulnerabilities, increase military spending, further fueling the cycle. The conflict becomes not only a local tragedy, but a global profit center replicated across industries and borders. For corporations with the right portfolios, instability is not a danger, it is a dividend. And for political elites, the crisis is a convenient distraction from domestic discontent. Instead of confronting inequality, corruption, or stagnant wages, they can rally populations around national defense, framing dissent as disloyalty. The broader lesson and the uncomfortable hook for the global audience is that this is not an exception, it is the rule. The system is designed to reward crisis, to channel fear into consumption, and to transform destruction into growth figures. So long as capitalism remains structured around profit as the overriding goal, wars will remain profitable ventures rather than catastrophic failures. The missiles flying into Tel Aviv are only the latest illustration of how deeply embedded this logic has become. They remind us that behind every battlefield lies a boardroom, behind every explosion lies a ledger, and behind every soldier or civilian casualty lies a balance sheet that tilts upward for the few at the expense of the many.